Hi, this is Risa and welcome to my Stitch Along series. In this video I'm going to show you how to turn your wedding bouquet into a ribbon embroidery wall art that you can admire forever. Here's my sister-in-law's wedding bouquet that I stitched as a 20th wedding anniversary gift for the couple. This video is going to show you all the steps and stitches I used to complete this project. Since wedding bouquets are very personal, I request you not to copy this design. However, you may use this video to learn the process. You may also use my stitch along to learn how to embroider some of the flowers for your own project if you also have sunflowers and roses. Let's get started with the pre-stitch preparation process. So I have two separate videos. One demonstrates how I've used iron-on transfer artist paper to transfer the image of the wedding bouquet onto cotton canvas fabric, which you can watch by clicking on the link above. Now, here is the image I've printed in reverse on the transfer paper, which I then ironed onto the fabric like so. Of course, you can also trace the image onto the fabric, but I've decided to use the transfer paper to transfer the image because then I get the nice background of her holding the bouquet. The next step is to determine the choice of ribbons and the stitch order. So what I did was I printed a second image and on it I stuck little pieces of ribbons that I thought would go well with my project, and I also numbered the stitch order, starting with stitching the background leaves and background flowers first before stitching the flowers in the foreground. I've selected and organized all the ribbons and threads, which I will lay out here onto the hoop to give you a sense of what I'll be using. So you'll need to do the same. Even though this is a stitch along, you probably will be working on your own bouquet requiring different colored ribbons than what I'll be using in my project. So here's what I'll be working with. 2 shades of 13mm green silk ribbon that I've rolled onto a bobbin, 7mm yellow and orange ribbons for the sunflowers, some green floss for the fern in the background, 3 shades of brown that I will use in combination for the centers of the sunflowers, 7mm dark green river silk ribbon for the smaller leaves, some 13mm peach river silk ribbon for the larger rose in the center, and some 7mm variated peach silk ribbon for the smaller roses. Now I may use these two in combination as well. Now she also has hollies or red berries in her bouquet, so I found some red beads that I think will work well for my project. Now I also have some leftover 3mm satin ribbon, which I think will go well for the vines here at the bottom. You'll also need a small straightening iron or any iron to iron the kinks of the silk ribbons before stitching. And finally, you'll need a muslin cloth that you'll need to stitch at the back of your fabric with simple white sewing thread, and make sure that you stitch outside the printed image so you don't pierce it. And so basically just use some simple sewing thread and run running stitches along the edges of that image to hold the muslin in place. Here we go, all the preparation is done. I have mounted my fabric with the muslin backing onto a hoop stand and I am now ready to stitch. That's it, let's start stitching. I have already stitched the stem for the fern and I'm going to stitch the background foliage starting with the fern using fly stitch. And here I'm using 2 strands of green floss. So essentially how I'm stitching the fly stitch is to take the needle out on one side, make sort of a V when I insert the needle, and then take it out in the center of the V and fasten the stitch. So you keep doing this to fill out that sort of image of the fern. So in my case it's a fern, in your case it might be leaf, it might be something else. Now moving on to stitching the vines with the 3mm satin ribbon that I had in stock. And now first I'm going to fasten the ribbon to the needle, and at the other end I'm going to fold it and insert the needle to make a knot. So I'm going to stitch the vines using straight stitch, and I will just alternate those stitches using the central vine or the central vein of the vine as a marker. Now to end off the ribbon stitches, simply insert the needle between the muslin and the main fabric and snip off a tail, which you will then stitch together with all the other ends of flowers and leaves that you would complete. Next I'm going to embroider the leaves. Now these leaves are pretty big, so I've decided to use a 13mm green silk ribbon, which I will first iron to remove all the kinks. And then I'm going to use a number 18 chenille needle to embroider this ribbon. So here I'm going to use simple ribbon stitches, and here a side stitch so that it sort of folds towards the center, and I'll use another stitch, another side stitch, so that it kind of covers the leaf in the background image. Do the same here. Once again, insert the needle in the side of the ribbon to get a nice fold towards the center, and use another stitch. Now to end off here, as you can see, I've cut off little tails, and I am now stitching with simple sewing thread all the tails. Now I'm going to use a much lighter shade of green. As you can see, the background has very light green leaves, and here I'm just using simple ribbon stitches and straight stitches to represent the leaves here. This one has a little bit of fold, so I am going to sort of fasten it in place with stab stitches. Now I'm going to use 7mm dark green ribbon to stitch the smaller leaves using a combination of ribbon stitches, straight stitches, and inverted ribbon stitches. Sort of just using it as I go along and seeing what fits the best. Moving on to stitching the sunflower. So I'm going to first stitch the sunflower that's at the background, and I've chosen to stitch this one on top that will go behind the large bud that will come over it. So to stitch the sunflower petals, I'm going to use a combination of ribbon stitches and straight stitches, starting with the ribbon stitch, and then here I'm stitching a straight stitch. So essentially I go into the fabric and adjust the ribbon so it has a nice lofty look, and then instead of going back up, let me just adjust the ribbon here first. So instead of going back up, I'm going to just go to the side here at the bottom and stitch a ribbon stitch like so, and then again go to the top and come back down with a straight stitch. So I'm just going to alternate between ribbon stitches and straight stitches, since I'm going to be using an orange ribbon and a 4 mm light yellow ribbon, I'm leaving some space here. So here I'm using a 4 mm yellow variated ribbon, again starting with the ribbon stitch, then a straight stitch, ribbon stitch, and so on and so forth. By the way, the yellow and orange ribbons are 7 mm silk ribbons, and here I'm filling up the space with the 7 mm orange ribbons. And here, as you can see at the bottom, I'm just making loops, as you can only see the ribbons partially. So here again, I'm repeating the ribbon and straight stitches for the next sunflower, which will also be partially seen as it will be covered by the roses on top. To finish off the sunflower, I'm going to start using 3 strands of the darkest brown floss or thread to make French knots, using 5 loops in the center, so you get sort of a lofty, higher look, and then progressively reducing the loops as I go towards the edges of the sunflower. So now I'm moving to the lighter shade of the brown thread, and finally along the edges to the lightest shade of brown thread with just 2 loops or single loops, as the case may be. So if you look at the picture, some of the petals sort of fold over the sunflower, so I wanted to just show you how to do that. As you can see, I'm just taking an extra ribbon and stitching it into the middle of the center of the sunflower, and I'm using a needle to pull it out so that the ribbon stitch sort of stands above the flower. And for the other ribbon here, I'm stitching it flat against the center using a single strand of yellow thread. Next, I'm going to embroider the large rosebud here. I've finished all the sunflowers, so I'm not going to show all of them in this video, otherwise the video will get too long. Now for the big rosebud, I'm going to make a loose French knot here at the center to give it a bit of a loft when I stitch the ribbon stitches over it. I'm using a 13 mm peach silk ribbon for the large rose here. So I'm stitching a ribbon stitch by inserting the needle in the center of the ribbon and then pulling through so that I get a nice pointy edge. Of course, being careful not to pull it right through. And then a side stitch on the right and a side stitch on the left to get a nice pretty curl of the ribbon. And here I'm using another needle to hold the top so that I get a square sort of open petal look, like so, and then taking out the needle, and I'll stitch a similar one on the right side. For the small rose, I'm going to stitch a loose French knot in the center and then simple straight stitches with a twirl around the center. So here I'm using the 7 mm variated peach ribbon. Now I'm getting close to the end of my project. The second last or third last feature of this bouquet is the central rose, and I'm using a 13 mm darker peach shade of silk ribbon, starting with a loose French knot in the center and then twisted straight stitches around the center. So I'm going to use a darker peach shade for about one circle around the center and then switch to the lighter peach shade for the edges. Now I'm going to stitch the red berries in these areas using the red bead with beading thread, a transparent beading thread, which I will use to stitch the beads in place. And now finally I'm going to stitch the central sunflower with 7 mm yellow and orange ribbons and a combination of alternating ribbon stitches and straight stitches. Thank you for watching this video. I hope it was useful. Don't forget to click the like button. I hope you'll be able to convert your bouquet into a beautiful ribbon embroidery wall art. Please do click the subscribe, like, and notification buttons. See you again next time. Bye bye.